Well, good afternoon. I believe it's afternoon now, everybody. We're so excited for you to join us this afternoon to just have a conversation about building comprehensive student well-being teams. So just to quickly introduce who you will be hearing from today, I am Kyle Miller. I'm the Director of Student Support and Counseling Services for Westfield, Washington Schools. So I oversee and support at the district level all of our school counselors, school social workers, our mental health partnership that's contracted with the school district as well. So I'm going to let my colleagues introduce themselves, and I'll turn it over to Terry Miller, who's next on my screen, and then she'll kick it to the other two colleagues.
Thank you, Kyle. Good afternoon, everybody. Happy you're here. I am Terry Miller. I am a school psychologist by training. Right now, I'm an administrator for special education at Hamilton, Boone, Madison Special Services. Been doing this for too many years for me to say. And I also am on the IAS, Indiana Association of School Psychologists Board. And so I get to do some work with some school psychologists and also a prepare crisis response trainer. And in my administrative job, I oversee a lot of our programs within special education. So thank you for being here. And Brooke Lawson.
Hi, everybody. My name is Brooke Lawson. I am the Director of Mental Health for Carmel Clay Schools. I'm a school social worker by training and have my LCSW. In my previous experiences, I worked in school-based community mental health, so as a school-based mental health therapist, and then moved into some leadership roles in the Community Mental Health Center for about 8 years. And I have been in district level leadership, leading mental health work in schools for the past 8 years. And I also love joining Terry and doing some of the prepare training and crisis response work across the state. And so I will kick it over to Christy.
Thanks, Brooke. Welcome, everybody. I'm Christy Berger. I currently serve as the Director of School Counseling and Mental Health in Center Grove Schools. Similar to Brooke and Kyle, I oversee our school counselors and our social workers and our community mental health partnership. So excited to be with you all today and share things that we are all very passionate about and hope can be recreated in different school districts. So I think, Brooke, you're going to kick us back off, right?
Nope, I think Kyle is next.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Whoops, sorry.
It's like I've never run slides on Zoom before.
That's okay.
Here we go.
So what are we going to be talking about today? So really just three main things, and we'll try to hit them. And then also my colleague Brooke will be monitoring the chat. So if you have questions along the way or some things that maybe you're wondering about, feel free to stick those in the chat and we'll do our best to answer those along the way. But first, we want to talk about developing the components of a comprehensive student well-being team. Many of you are probably coming from districts where there are various roles assigned in your district, whether that's school counselors, social workers, mental health professionals, school psychologists. We're going to be talking about what are those essential components to build that team. We'll also talk about reducing role confusion, because when you put several different roles into one school or one district, there's overlap. And so one of the things that we believe is important is to begin to clarify what those roles are and what each of those roles should be supporting to the greatest extent possible. And we'll talk about some of the challenges maybe associated with that. And then we'll kind of finish with exploring funding opportunities to build these teams and how to go about doing that. So before we do that, Brooke, if you want to advance to the next slide, we feel that it's probably been a little while since you've been either a student, but we're also wanting to know a little bit about who's with us today. So if you would just do this, go ahead and scroll through them all, put them on the list there on the screen, Brooke, if you would, and then just respond in the chat. Are you a teacher? Are you a school counselor? Are you a school psychologist, social worker? Do we have any building admin? I'm seeing school counselor, district level, school counselor, school psychologist, community partner. Fantastic. Good to have you in the room. More social workers, school counselors. So it looks like mainly school counselors, school social workers. We have a teacher in the room, behavioral resource, an LMHC on the social work team. Good, because as we go about this conversation today, it'll be interesting to hear and see from each of those different lenses and the perspectives that you have. So we're grateful that you're all in the room. So to get started, we're going to give you a quick pop quiz though. It's probably, again, like I said, been a little while since you've given a pop quiz. So here's what I need you to do. Along the left side of my screen, you see text acronyms, because if today we're going to be talking about the next generation of kids, maybe we should probably understand where they're coming from. So here's what you need to do. In 1 minute, I need you to decipher what those text acronyms stand for on the left, 1 through 5, and then identify the social media app 6 through 10 on the right side. So we're going to click the timer for 1 minute, figure out, put a piece of paper, however, go through them all and see how many you can get. Ready, go.
Bummer, we're not getting the great sound of that
Oh,
timer.
that's right. The music is amazing on my timer, although my colleagues may disagree.
Brooke didn't want to share her sound, I guess.
So go ahead and just put them on a piece of paper. We'll go through them together here in just a minute, and you're going to mark off how many of them you are able to identify. So individual kind of work time here for the next 25 seconds. Down to 15. Hopefully you're working through them fairly quickly. But if you're like me, you may be wondering what in the world is going on.
Did you hear the sound? I'm sorry, I forgot I was muted.
No.
Nope, that's okay. So
Oh,
Brooke stopped it with
I was
7
the only
seconds.
one in my office having a party.
Nice. Brooke got to listen to the music. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. I am going to say number 1, PU equals, and then Brooke's going to hit the next slide because it'll pop up what that means. And your job is to simply figure out how many out of the 10 you got. And then in the chat, we'll figure out maybe who got the most out of 10. Okay, ready? Number 1, PU stands for? Pull up. Very good. I know you got it all right. Number 2, HMU stands for?
Wait, time out. Do you think that they know what pull up means? Because I actually had to Google what pull up meant.
That's a good point,
I
Brooke.
think
Go
you
ahead and
should give
share
an
it.
explanation.
Go for it.
Oh, like I'm getting ready to arrive somewhere. Like I'm going to pull up at the mall.
Yes. Or, hey, why don't you pull up to Taco Bell and meet me there, right? Like, let's pull up. Good.
Yep.
Number 2, HMU stands for? Hit me up. Very good. I know you got that right. Typically used when teenagers are saying, this is what we used to say is, hey, call me. But not anymore. It's hit me up. Number 3, TTYL. Talk to you later. Very good. For some reason, adolescents don't have enough time to type out talk to you later. They just want to say TTYL. Number 3, to be honest. Very good. Brooke, give us an example of that one.
Well, when you want to just really give someone the blunt truth about something that's going on. To be honest with you, Kyle,
Yeah.
I thought everybody heard the music.
Right. Very good. Number 5, this one you have to give a little bit of voice inflection to reflect an emerging adolescent. So it's like, I know, right? Did I get that right? Like, I have a 15-year-old at home, so I hear it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
All right, number 6, we all know this one. It is TikTok. Very good. Extra points for the first person in the chat that can tell me what TikTok was called before it was called TikTok. Go. What was it called before TikTok bought it? Musical.ly.
Ooh.
Very good. There we go.
Damn, way to go.
Former
Allison.
school counselor used to deal with Musical.ly a lot with our students who would post something where they were lip singing or something, doing a dance, and then people would either critique it or maybe not tell them how awesome they were. Number 7, we know this one. It is Instagram. Very good. Number 8, we know that one. Snapchat. Number 9, maybe a little bit more obscure. Threads, if you're familiar with that one. And number 10, we're all now familiar, formerly known as Twitter is now X. Okay, go ahead and start putting into the chat. How many of you got all 10 of them right? Like put a 10 in the chat. You got all 10 of them right? Let's see if we have anybody that has all 10 of them right. The chat is a little slow. How about 9? Hey,
Jessica,
Jessica, nicely done. Just there's a couple more. Katie
me,
had a 9. Very good. How many were kind of in that 8? Throw an 8 in the chat if you're an 8. There we go. Where's my 7s? Anyone that's 7 or below probably doesn't want to put it in the chat. So we we see you. We know how difficult. There's a 5. Way to go, Janice. With you.
and
So
now you know, so you can fit in with your teenagers if you have any at home. So
for sure. I have a 15 and 13-year-old at home, so I have 2 teenagers. And some of these were 15-year-old approved. So she helped me work through these and eliminated 4 or 5 of them that she said, Dad, no one uses that anymore. Like, move on. So we do this because to start off because students are complex, aren't they? In the environmental landscape that we find ourselves educating and leading our youth in is rapidly changing. I don't have to tell you that it's much different than when we all were kids. So when we start thinking about the complexity of our students, we also need to be thinking about the complexity of the support systems that we have in place in order to meet their evolving needs. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about what does that comprehensive, multidisciplinary team look like, and how do we put supports in place to meet those evolving needs that are complex in our kids. So if you go on to the next slide, Brooke, if you would, please. You're going to share with us, I believe, a high-level overview of all of these different roles that may be making up this comprehensive team.
yeah, and so this is a busy slide, but it also kind of shows that, you know, when we think about the support systems that we need in our schools to really provide that comprehensive student support, it takes all of us. And I think in the past, and there have been times where schools use many of these roles interchangeably. And our team has had a lot of discussion, and really why we created this presentation, because we feel like each role plays an important part in our schools in supporting students' well-being. And there's a lot of crossover as well. And so we're going to spend some time during our presentation today really talking about the specific areas where we think each of these roles, and when we talk about really the student well-being team, we're talking about a school counselor, a school social worker, a school psychologist, and a community mental health provider, who all make up the student well-being team. And so there's crossover. There's certainly areas where each position has their expertise, and then they really need to be working well together as a team to support overall student well-being.
So as the, I believe maybe the only practicing school counselor on the panel, is that right? Am I the only? Okay, so just a quick background. I spent 13 years as a school counselor here in Westfield at our intermediate school, hanging out with 10 to 12-year-olds in 5th and 6th grade for many years. And so have this perspective of life as a school counselor. One of the things that's difficult, and again, everyone on this call from Indiana is well aware of our extremely high ratios of counselor to students. It was like that in my school. I think it was probably 1 to about 500 students. And so one of the frustrations I think that comes with that, even when you have a comprehensive school counseling program, is that it is very difficult, I believe, to ask one person in the school to meet all of the academic, social and emotional, behavioral health, mental health, and college and career readiness needs of 500 kids. Maybe some of you are sitting out there at 600, 700 to 1. Maybe some of you are lucky out there and meet the 250 to 1 ratio. If you are, call me. I'd love to hear from you. but we know that our ratios are extremely high, right? So as you move on to that next slide, Brooke, the the question becomes, why don't we just hire more school counselors? And I'll get to that in a little bit. But as I navigated the waters of being a school counselor, one of the frustrations I had with that siloed comprehensive school counseling program is that I could go in, deliver a great classroom lesson to students on whatever the topic may be, and I would also be able to probably measure that. I could do a pre and a post, and I could take that information to my administrator and see, look at the great things that I have done. But one of the things that was frustrating is, and I've realized that some of the skills that we're trying to teach students, particularly on the preventative side, doesn't really happen in one lesson for 45 minutes one time a year or once every 3 months. And so it was really difficult, even in a comprehensive school counseling program, for one person to meet all of that preventative work. And so one of the things that we've talked a little bit about in our district, particularly at the elementary level, before we're talking about classroom lessons, we deliver those unless two conditions are met. Number one, the teacher's already introduced the skill, and the counselor simply coming in to provide reinforcement and support for that skill, to just continue to develop that, provide another perspective. The second condition would be that if the counselor's introducing this skill, there's already agreed upon system within that classroom or the school as a whole to continue to develop that outside of just that one 45-minute lesson, which school counselors in the room, it takes a lot of time to jump into those classrooms, and you're blocking out a whole month to maybe get through 1 or 2 grade levels. And so that becomes pretty difficult. So we thinking about this systems approach, right? So as you go to the next slide, so the question becomes, well, why don't we just hire more school counselors, right? Like if we just did that, we would have more availability to do the preventative work at tier 1, some of the small group stuff at tier 2. But that's difficult when in 3 months in our district, in K through 8, we completed 31 Columbia suicide severity rating scales on students who were presenting with suicidal ideation. We had co-created with the parent and the student 21 safety plans with students who were struggling with some of the mental health things that were going on. We documented 468 students that came to the school counselor with moderate to severe anxiety or depression, and responded to, close to 210 safety concerns as a broad category around students that maybe were in harm to themselves. And so, yes, we need more school counselors, and we need additional staff with specific expertise that can provide tiered level support for all students, getting beyond the notion that the school counselor and their comprehensive school counseling program, which is great, is the foundation, but needs additional support outside of that. And so speaking from a school counselor, I found the need to have additional professionals that have expertise in specific areas that we can really zero in to meet the needs of kids. So turned it over to, I believe, Christy, who will be talking a little bit about social workers.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. And I was also a school counselor for middle school and had originally started, though, as a school social worker until I went back so that I could be at the middle school level. So actually have had the experience of both. And what I love is what Kyle was talking about, is that our school counselors are trained so well in that proactive, preventative, comprehensive approach. And it just complements so well with our school social workers who can come in and support at some higher level needs with some more intentional skills. And so when we're thinking about truly school social workers and using them in the way that they are trained and the way that it should be in our comprehensive student wellness team, is we're really looking at people who are certified. They have a master's degree in social work. They have their school service license through the Department of Education. And a part of their schooling program includes having specific training in how to work with the school, how to have some understanding around Article 7, RTI, MTSS, really just how to focus in on those systems that are within a school. But on top of that, as a school social worker, you're going to have a variety of training in social justice, risk assessments, just intervention, different clinical strategies that can be used. And then you're able to provide services at a higher level or more intense level, really with those tier 2 and tier 3. And something that I talk a lot with my school social workers about in my district, because a lot of them came from the CMHC world. So they are licensed to be able to provide certain types of therapy and skills as they could in a mental health center. But when we are school social workers, we need to make sure that we're staying in our scope of practice and that all of the services that we're providing are relevant to students' educational gaps and those barriers who are continually coming up to block them from success at school. And so what are some of those clinical interventions and supports that we've learned in our schooling and our other spaces that we can connect to school so that our students are being able to be access the education and successful in the school setting. So just kind of wanted to lay the foundation truly on what a school social worker looks like in Indiana. And then Brooke, if you want to go to the next slide. And one of the things that we really need to do in order to make sure we're targeting those right students for tier 2 and tier 3 is looking at some data. So what type of data is your district collecting to determine that students need some additional supports? I think for many years, we have looked at attendance and behavior data. And as a practicing school social worker and school counselor, we knew that that wasn't really a true read of what our students needed. And I think that when really coming from an MTSS framework, the importance behind a universal screener was so huge for our school counseling programs and our school social work programs, so that we were making sure that all of our students that had needs were having those needs met, especially with, I think the students that keep me up at night are the students that are the ones that fly under the radar and pretty quiet. Like, we know the kids who exhibit extreme behaviors because we're seeing it, we're hearing it, but it's those kids that internalize a lot of that. So I did see a question in the chat. We at Center Grove, before the most recent legislation, we used Panorama, and when the legislation switched, we use our own internal Google Doc. So our counseling team, K-12, we all focus in some aspect of regulation. I'm just sharing, I think, the elementary data around regulation, but we do it fall and spring. Next year, we'll actually be doing it fall, winter, spring, because we've had some requests from our teachers at the elementary level to do it a little bit more frequently. But we house it all internally through Google Sheets, so that that allows us to not have to get that active consent. We still provide opt-out. We still have families that opt out, but it's not that third-party vendor, which was a part of that legislation. So again, we use our internal document. At the district level, I'm the one that kind of organizes all that data to present back to our team. So Brooke, you want to hit the next slide? Yeah. Terry.
All right, awesome. Hey, this to me is really exciting to be thinking about us all working together. As a school psychologist, one reason I haven't been a school psychologist for a number of decades is because when I did the school psychology work, I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed doing I got to do some counseling. I got to do some work with at-risk students, which they were called at that point in my career. But I had to do an awful lot of report writing, an awful lot of things that to me were not very fulfilling. And so, which was sad, because if you look at what can a school psychologist do, we are trained at the lowest level that we would be trained is an EDS, which is above a master's level. And many of us have our PhDs in the area of school psychology. And so we just wanted to highlight the idea that there are a lot of skills that school psychologists have that, unfortunately, on the next slide, I will talk to you about some of the challenges on the why that we don't get used in the way that we could, because you can see we have expertise to do universal wellness promotion and prevention, working alongside the counseling and social workers that we just heard about. Because out of those levels, we have the areas where we can look at the data, we can help to analyze the data, look at what does the school climate look like across the board as we look at the bigger picture of it, just like the social worker might do, but at even a bigger picture, working alongside administrators as we're looking at our data with those universal screeners. And then one of the things that we're doing to see is are the SEL lessons making a difference, those kinds of things. And then also through that tier 1 type of approach, we would also be looking at early identification to support any of those behavioral needs as soon as we can, and helping to look at that. So working alongside, again, our partners with trauma-informed services, data analysis, looking at school staff consultation, that we can look at the numbers that maybe we did when we did our psychoeducational testing, but also combine that with the other data that we collect, like we talked about nurse visits, our attendance and different things like that, suspensions, reports to the office. So how do we combine the information that we get whenever we do our individual psychoeducational testing to help to really translate that to the school, to the classroom setting, to help the staff that work with the students on a regular basis? And then on to the next slide to just look at the next higher levels. So we have targeted school interventions that we are able to look like. We are able to do time limited individual or group counseling that might be related to a crisis, might be either in school or outside of school to work with the students, crisis intervention and response. And then assessments, of course, which everybody looks at. That's what we are many times looked at as the testers, and the IEP planning, which we are, but also those very important functional behavior assessments and behavior intervention plans that can be done for students that are not necessarily special education students. Some people might fight you on that, but we have the skills to work with other students besides just students who have an IEP. And then those intense coordinating with those community partners, especially if you do not have a social worker within your school. That could be a role that a school psychologist could play, as well as looking at connecting with those therapeutic services, and again, the suicides intervention and prevention. But as with any of our professions that we're talking about today, we do have challenges. The shortage of school psychs, and we'll look at those numbers here in just a second. And then the perception of our range of expertise, like I've already alluded to. We're seen as testers, unfortunately, because if you look at those, the next thing we're looking at, those timeline requirements for evaluations. So when I was a school psych, if I wanted to do some of the work that was outside of that testing realm, many of the stuff I needed to do my reports and my paperwork at home, which I was happy to do, but it's not something that people saw as, the other stuff wasn't seen as something that I should be doing. So trying to advocate for that we do have that expertise to work alongside the partners that we have here on our call today. So, but then also we have this idea, which I think everybody probably has this, across our districts, we end up stealing from each other because of that huge shortage of school psychs. So that's a challenge that we have. We were just talking about that today in my office, we try to make it as attractive as possible, but so do other people. We have great school districts in our area, so across the state. So some of those challenges are there. And then looking at what does our shortages look like? So NASP, our National Association of School Psychologists, our professional organization, the recommendation is a ratio of 500 students to 1 school psychologist being available to the students and to the staff. And the national ratio last school year was over 1,000 students per 1 school psychologist. And then looking specifically at the Indiana, just almost 1,700 students to 1 school psychologist. And I looked at what is our data here in Hamilton, Boone, Madison, which we have 6 school districts across 2 different counties. And we have a ratio of about just under 1,500 to 1 school psychologist. So we continue to really struggle with, if we don't have enough school psychs, that it's more and more challenging to be able to do those things, to work alongside our partners of school counselors and school social workers. But in the end, we're going to talk about some possible funding opportunities that actually some of them are a little bit new. So as we work through our slides here.
Thanks, Terry.
Yep.
And I'm going to talk just a little bit about school-based mental health providers. And for many of you, this is not new information. I know many of our schools in the state of Indiana connect with outside agencies to contract mental health providers to provide therapeutic services to students in schools. And really, to be quite honest, this is probably one of the best places for a mental health provider to be. It's easy for students to access care while they're at school, since they spend a lot of their days in a school environment. It's also helpful to parents when a parent doesn't have to leave work once a week to take their child to their appointment. And it's really great for our educators to have somebody that has a mental health background and that expertise to help coach our teachers on different interventions that they might put in place for students who are struggling with some mental health issues. And there's really been some great research done around mental health treatment in schools, showing that really it has strong effects when it's integrated into the academic setting. And so when we think about these providers, typically we have a range of providers that provide this support, but really it's usually a master's level therapist. In some districts, like the district I work in, it's a licensed therapist who's providing that support. And then some districts also have bachelor's level providers who are doing some more type of skills work with students in the classroom, really helping them apply the skills that they're learning in therapy. And this really is a tier 3 support for students and is really individualized based on those student needs. So when we think about tier 1, obviously that's our universal support. Tier 2 is targeted, but not always targeted individually based on that student. And then obviously our mental health providers are providing that tier 3 support. And they provide a range of services too, just depending on the student need. It could be individual therapy, group therapy, family therapy, skills work. And so those are some of kind of the areas where mental health providers plug in. And as we think about mental health services in schools, I think it's really important that from a school perspective, we're also looking at data and collecting that data from our community partners, looking at the number of referrals of students that we receive or that us as a school are giving these providers, what those reasons for referrals are. I know in my previous role, the number one reason for referral was anxiety. And so our district team started talking about what might we be doing from a prevention level for students who are struggling with anxiety? What kind of skills might we want to make sure that we're building into tier 1 so that we may have less referrals of students? Also looking at the number of referrals that turn into active clients and how many of those students are actually receiving services and what were barriers for students that didn't receive services. We often look at the number of services provided overall, which can be a really exciting number when you think that thousands of therapeutic services were provided to students at your school. Looking at demographic information for students is important. I mentioned kind of the primary diagnosis as well, and considering that as you're looking at what tier 2 supports you might put in place. You know, if you've got a lot of kids that struggle with anxiety, it might be nice to have a tier 2 group for students who struggle with anxiety issues. And then we also want to look at outcomes of these services and supports. I know in particular for the district I work in, and some of my colleagues here on the webinar, our district is exchanging some money for these services as well. So we want to make sure that we're being good stewards of that money and look at, you know, our students' attendance increasing. Are we lessening the number of discipline infractions that students might be receiving? Are students' test scores going up or their grades going up? And then also the number of successful discharges. So how many kids got better as a result of the services and supports that were provided to them? And so I have an example here. This is from my previous role that I worked in, and we looked at at the end of every semester, we collected data, but then we also looked at data at the end of every school year. And so our contract, we worked with Community Health Network, and our contract started in January of 2017. I think this data came from last school year. So just in that amount of time, we had served almost 3,000 students. Looking at the referrals each year, we looked at those number of referrals and then also the number of active students. So almost 1,000 students each school year were being supported. Caseload sizes of our providers, just like Terry mentioned, there's a shortage of school psychologists. There's certainly a shortage of mental health providers. And I know we feel that in our district here. And so wanting to make sure that we are also supporting those staff members and making sure that we're not giving them caseload sizes that are too large, that make it hard for them to do their job. And then I mentioned the common diagnosis. So the 3 common diagnoses in that school year were anxiety, ADHD, and depression. And then this is just a sample of some of the outcomes of students that receive mental health treatment in our schools. So we would take a look at their NWEA scores and see what students made growth. We also looked at GPAs of our secondary students to see how many showed improvement. And then also looking at discipline infractions. And so you'll just see here that many of the students that were involved in this treatment not only did better academically, but also had a decrease in some of the behavior issues as well.
And so I think the important part of all of this was just to share the different roles and what they bring. But then we also know when we're all coming together with our own national organizations, our frameworks, our ethics, our values, right? That brings a lot of different ideas into the work that we go to support our students, and kind of comes around that whole comprehensive school mental health team. And so, being aware of this, we know that there can be some turf wars, or that seems extreme, but that's what we put, turf wars on our next slide. But just some unsure of what role is each role, and how do I stay in my lane? How do we work together? How do we increase communication? Because we all have our expertise, but if we don't have communication among that team, then we're not going to be doing things in the best interest of students, because we're going to be doing them siloed. And so Brooke, Kyle, and I have shared different ways that when we were in our positions, we started in outlining what each role is, what's their responsibility, and how they can support student success each day. And so we, I don't know, Brooke, if you think we have time to pull one of those up or not, but I think it was just really important for us to be clear and define each of those. And we did that as a group. And then we have conversations constantly. And we also know the reality of a school is sometimes you're like having to tap in and tap out and really support students in different spaces. But our ultimate goal when we're working together in this student wellbeing team is really focusing in on that. So this is a forward-facing document that we created as a district, just to define the roles, the credentials, the understanding for that. We also have some internal documents, and I think maybe Westfield's looks a little, that we shared here, example of how do I support in tier 1, how do I support in tier 2, and that was really helpful, especially at our high school and our elementary levels, where some of the roles maybe blurred lines a little bit. And so we were just really clear on being able to define the roles and responsibility within scope of practice. And so, yeah, here's an example of what Kyle and his team did in Westfield, and just really focusing in on what does this look like for each one of those roles if we're lucky enough to have them. We're also very aware on this call that not every school district has that or is working towards it, but here are some reasons why you should advocate for the individual roles to support all of your students. So we wanted to make sure we linked that so that you all have that information, but then we also did put together maybe just an infographic that you could use in your space on the next slide, in talking as a team, in talking to district leadership. Sorry.
Sorry.
You doing okay?
Yeah.
About just what does a comprehensive school mental health supports look like as a framework, and how do I support that? And, we pulled this together as a team, but we also took some information. I believe it was CDC had put out some information around just school-based mental health supports. And what I loved about their specific document was that they called out the implementation staff. So what is the responsibility of a classroom teacher in this space? And so some of that character education, teaching and SEL lessons, using literacy to be able to practice some of those skills, like what books are we using in read alouds, what opportunities are the kids getting to practice working in groups and working on building some of those relationship skills. And so I think it just really clearly called out that this is a shared responsibility among all of the members. And I also think some of my teachers are so amazing and they want to do so much for the students, and sometimes they want to be saying, oh, well, maybe we should be doing this or doing that. And it's really helpful to give them almost that sense of peace of like, hey, your space is tier 1. Like, we really want you to own that. And the tier 2, we're going to pull in our school counselors, our social workers, and our school psychs, and so on, to make sure that the students are getting that appropriate support. And then at the very top of that tier is where they're getting that treatment. So our highest need students need to be partnering with our community mental health partnerships, if you have that, or if you need to be referring that out for your families. And so this visual was helpful for our team when we were thinking through this, and hopefully you can look at that as even a conversation starter of where are we doing things well, where are we doing, where are some places for growth, and then this is why we need all of the parties to really support that holistic approach, just like we do with our academics, to make sure that that child is being supported. And then as Brooke hit a little bit as she was wrapping up, she was talking about data. And so she's going to talk a little bit more about what that data collection looks like at each tier.
Thanks, Christy. I was also going to mention some of those documents. I'm newer in my role in Carmel. This is my first school year, and we have really spent some time as a student support team really defining roles. And I think that it's important For those of you that are, even if you're at a building level, but those that are in leadership roles, it would have been really easy for me to define everybody's job and role. And I probably could have knocked it out relatively quickly, but it's important that you let the people who are doing the work really spend time defining those roles. And it really led to some great conversation among our teams for them to be able to talk as a team about what that role definition might look like. And we're working to make sure that we have some outward facing documents as well for our community, because those of us that live in this school counseling, school social work, school psych, school-based mental health world, we know all of the different services and supports that we can provide. But I think it is naive of us to think that many of our community members or even parents understand what those professionals in our schools do and how they support students. So as we think about data, it is important to make sure that we're collecting data around the work that's being done, making sure that students, are learning these tier 1 lessons that we're teaching them, making sure that we are looking at different data around discipline infractions. If we have a ton of issues with a particular place in the building, or maybe we haven't been teaching our school-wide expectations appropriately enough. And so it's important that we look at data. And so we did work on a little bit of a tiered approach to data collection, and important data that you might need to collect around tier 1 work, tier 2 work. Looking at, when we think about academics, we wouldn't ever put a student in an academic tier 2 intervention without progress monitoring that. And I think that so often when it comes to the student support services that we provide, we often aren't looking at progress monitoring and looking at whether what we're doing with that student is helpful. And so when you think about small groups, making sure you're doing a pre and post test for that group. And many of the group curriculums that a lot of our school counselors and school social workers use already come with some of those pre and post tests. But you could also work as a team to develop those on your own as well, and think about what are the skills that I'm hoping that students are going to gain from this support, and really measuring whether or not they receive those skills. Another great tool is the strengths and difficulties assessment. It's a free tool that could be used with students when you're looking at putting them into some more tier 2 targeted supports. So it's helpful to identify what are those strengths of the students and what are some of those difficulty areas that you might want to target and support. And then doing that every 6 to 8 weeks to make sure that your intervention is working. And then when we think about tier 3 data collection, some of our community mental health providers are using some of the different types of scales, like the generalized anxiety disorder scale, maybe the patient health questionnaire, or even some of the depression or anxiety and stress scale rating forms. These typically are not used by school hired employees. These are typically used by some of those mental health professionals that might be working with students. And Terry, I don't know if you wanted to add anything from a school psychologist perspective.
I love that you asked that, because I was like, because I will tell you that our school psychologists, when we're looking at the possibility that a student might have an emotional disability within the special education realm, we do use those similar kinds of assessments or screening tools for the teacher to maybe fill out about the student, as well as the student individually working with the student to look at where are they falling on a standardized assessment, such as those that are mentioned here on the tier 3. So we are trained to do that and to analyze it and interpret that data at the school level. So thanks, Brooke.
Yeah, thank you. I know Christy had to hop off, but when you access the slides, we did want to just give you some examples of different types of interventions that can be provided at every tier. And so we've linked all of these interventions at tier 1 that can be put into place. I'll touch on just one in particular. In my previous district, we did a lot of training around community circles and the importance of creating a classroom climate and culture where students felt like they belonged and everybody had an opportunity to contribute, and really setting aside a time of day where we weren't focused on academics, but we were focusing on relationship building. And so We created this community circle toolkit that we used as a training tool for our teachers to help them to understand kind of what those expectations are. And then as we think about tier 2 and different types of interventions, we included a check-in, check-out form, a sample check-in, check-out form. And also, this goes way back into my community mental health days. We had created a focus card, just really a behavior card for students to really help them to self-monitor a little bit and set goals around behaviors. And then as far as tier 3, we also included some information around one-on-one counseling, some of our suicide and threat assessment or safety assessment screeners, and samples of that information in here, as well as thinking about, I just this morning was a part of a meeting. We have a vaping committee in our district, and as a county in Hamilton County, we've all been talking about some of the struggles that we have around students who are using substances and the lack of interventions for them. And so we worked with a community or a private practice in our community to really create a targeted program for students. And so I linked some information on that there for the targeted interventions. Terry or Kyle, I don't know if there's anything else either of you want to add here.
We may get to this in a couple more slides. I was just looking forward, but just that whole, like I used to do a lot of work around check-in, check-out, and some people would say, and so just with any of your interventions that they say, well, this isn't working as you look at the data for the students, making sure that those interventions and working together with the team that you work with as far as looking at which interventions are appropriate for a group or students, making sure those are being done with fidelity and in the way that we know it's best practices. And so just making sure, because sometimes check-in, check-out, you think, well, we're just supposed to meet with a student. Well, if it's not working, maybe there's something we need to be looking to be more intentional with the intervention as far as what's the best practice for implementing that intervention. So thanks, Brooke.
Yeah,
I think I would just add real quickly, for any district that is jumped deeply into professional learning communities or PLC, sometimes I think in this side of the house, even though I don't think there are different sides of the house, academic and mental health, there could be a tendency to think that like, oh, PLC, that doesn't apply to me, but been really challenged recently to think about what does this collaborative team, which is the whole idea around the PLC process, how do we engage a collaborative team around the 4 questions? Question 1 being, what do we want all kids to know and be able to do? So as you think about your tier 1 interventions, getting a comprehensive multidisciplinary group of educators together to collectively identify what is it actually that we want all kids to know and be able to do. That process in and of itself, when you engage teachers and counselors and other personnel within your school, can be really beneficial of clarifying and also creating what everyone calls buy-in, right? Like I don't really know what you mean by buy-in, but it does engage educators in the process to say, yes, we have academic standards that we want all kids to know and be able to do. And there's a set of skills that we know through decades of research help kids learn better. And we want to teach those skills too. So how do you collectively identify those? And it's a process that we've kind of gone through and really does help kind of zero in your tier 1 focus as opposed to just maybe a program or something that you purchase or buy from the outside. So if you have questions about that, feel free to give me a shout on PLCs and mental health.
Awesome. Thanks, Kyle. We also really felt like it was important. Obviously, each of these roles is really, really important to our schools, but it's also very, very important that these roles are actually spending time together, talking about the work that's being done, planning as a team. And so we linked in here a shared meeting agenda. This is actually something that we created this year in the district that I work in to just really make sure that our partnership meetings were staying focused and that everyone was on the same page. And so that's just a sample of a meeting agenda. Take it and use it as you'd like. I know it seems kind of tedious to have to create an agenda every single time, but we really felt like that helped keep everybody focused on the important things that they should be talking about. And so making sure that they're talking about prevention opportunities that the team can work on together, students that they're making referrals for, students who might be in a tier 3 support situation and are ready to move down to tier 1 and might need support from the school social worker or the school counselor. And so making sure that everybody has that awareness and is working together to support students is really important. We also, from a district level perspective, think that it's important to consider when you might need to pull everybody from a district level together. And so in our district, we have a district level student assistance team. And sometimes we have to have an ad hoc meeting for a particular student that might just be having a really hard time, that we need to put all of our brains together and think about how we might best support them. And so it is nice to have someone in a role like mine or Kyle's or Christy's who's leading that district level support. But also there are other departments and community partners that might need to be pulled in on those conversations. And so for our district level student assistance team meeting, we spend a lot of time making sure that we're including those right partners. So we include our school resource officers. Often for Christy, they have their chief of police. We have our SRO supervisors involved in those meetings. We make sure that somebody from special education is a part of that team. We typically are inviting DCS and probation, our nursing directors, and our community mental health leadership to participate. And so Christy's district has a referral form that she's linked in here that you can take a look at if you're considering starting one of those teams, to make sure that you're all putting your heads together to support students best. And then I'm going to lean on all of my colleagues to help with this slide. But as you're thinking about funding, obviously it would be wonderful if we had enough funding to hire all the school counselors and school social workers that we need to support our students. But there are some new funding opportunities, and I can talk a little bit about a few of those. I know in my previous role, we were awarded the school mental health grant, which has been released again. I think it's due today, right, Kyle?
It is due today.
So that grant is a grant from the U.S. Department of Education. It's a federal grant, and it can only be used to hire school counselors, school social workers, and school psychologists, which is really amazing that from a federal level that they're seeing the need for these services and supports and offering some funding for that. I also think there's opportunities to talk with your community partners about split positions. I know when I first started in the school mental health world, I was a contracted school-based mental health therapist. So half of my hours were to be the school counselor or school social worker for any student in the building. And then I carried a caseload of students as well. And so that's always an opportunity to have a conversation with your community partners. Kyle or Terry, do you want to talk about Title or Medicaid funding?
Yeah, I'll take Title IV real quickly. Those of you who interact with grants, maybe at the district level, understand that Title IV funds, the Part B of that, can be used and allocated to support the overall social and emotional health and wellness of students in your district. So definitely a part. If you don't know what that is, ask maybe the district person who oversees those grants. The Title IV allocation, it's based on on a formula for each district. So each district gets different funds based on a variety of factors, but Title IV is a big one. I would also give a word of caution as you're writing grants. Just ensure that you have a sustainability plan. I think not the worst thing, but a really challenging thing that can happen is you're awarded maybe a grant and you begin to build out your mental health or behavioral health infrastructure within your district. And then at the end of the grant period, there's not a plan in place to sustain, and those positions maybe go away. So be thinking about, one of the things that we've found successful in that is if it's a multi-year grant, maybe the first year those positions are funded through grant dollars. And then on the second year of that grant, maybe you add another one with grant dollars, and then your district picks up that other position. And so you begin to slowly and incrementally begin to build your infrastructure, but also you're incurring some of that cost into your own budget. And so that shows, number one, that your district is committed, and number two, you have a sustainable plan as you begin to work through that grant cycle. Difficult to fund everything, and then after 3 or 5 years, then your district is on the hook for a pretty significant portion of money. So Title IV, the school-based mental health grant, there is the school counseling grant that's out there right now, where elementaries, I believe, can apply for current teachers to go back and get their school counseling degree. So if you have some aspiring school counselors in your elementary schools, look into that. And it's a way for them to maybe offset the cost of going back to school to get their master's in school counseling. So there's just a variety of different grants that are out there, along with, again, Title I, Title IV, Title II in terms of professional development. So there are a lot of different things that are out there. Terry, what would you add?
I would just add real quickly, because we're getting short on time, but I put in the chat, if people are not familiar with the school Medicaid reimbursement that you can get, it's not connected to individual students or families Medicaid, but this is something, legislation that was passed in June of 2023, that there's some additional funding through your school that your school psychologist can sign off on. There's a lot of arguing going on about it for the vendors that help us to pull down the money. That is something that we as school psychologists really advocated for. And so our delegate, Mike Manis, who was up in the northern part of the state, our delegate for NASP, he is putting together, he put together a PowerPoint and a slide deck for that for our conference this spring. And so if you have interest in learning more about that after you look at the stuff on the DOE website, because they don't have it all figured out as far as this extra new set of funding we can get through Medicaid, just let me know and we can work on that together. But there is a fair amount of money that can be pulled down once we are learning how we can do that through our vendors like ClayMate, and don't know what all the other vendors are around the state. So if you're not familiar with that, that's something to reach out to your special education people, your school psychologist to work on that together.
Thanks, Terry. So I did drop a link in the chat for all of you so we are putting this on as a part of the counselor leadership tactic team. And our team would really like to know, what more do you want to know about this work? And so I left a link on there. It's also linked in the slides. We also wanted to share some resources quickly. I know some people may have to jump off, but Christy referenced the CDC report. And so we've linked that in here, as well as if you haven't ever used the SHAPE system from the Center for School Mental Health, they have some wonderful quality guides that you can take a look at. They have a great Tier 1 guide, as well as a Tier 2 and Tier 3 quality guide, where they've actually talked about best practices, shared examples of other districts. And then if you really want to sit down with the district level team and take note of all of the school health providers that you have in your schools, the school health profile, which is part of the SHAPE system, really takes a look at all of the different roles you have, who they're hired by, and can be really impactful as you're talking about and making decisions as you move forward. And of course, the NASP website is always a wonderful resource that I know Terry linked in here for you as well. So we appreciate your time. We have Christy and I's contact information on here. Terry and Kyle, if you want to drop your emails in the chat, that would be wonderful. Thanks for joining us. As always, reach out to any of the four of us if you have any questions or would like additional information. We can stay on just for a few minutes if anybody has questions and would like to ask questions to us.